Welcome into our roundtable again. Bill Priestley here with you, along with Michael Vincent and Tony Mulvey. And gentlemen, let me start off by saying that in 1993, I had the unfortunate occurrence of being caught in the middle of three tremendous weather patterns, one originating in the Northwest, another originating in the Gulf of Mexico, another originating in the Atlantic Ocean. Those three things converged to form what we now call the blizzard of 93, or the superstorm of 1993. I was camping in the Smokies at the time and managed to get through that. Now, there's a 45-minute story that goes along with that, which I'm not going to get into, but it appears that what's going on in California may have some kind of the similar elements, as a lot of different things are happening in California that are going to be impacting and are impacting the freight industry. And I wanted to take this roundtable and look at some of these influences that are coming together, especially in the fact that, as we just talked with Matt Leffler about the fact that they're going through negotiations out there as well, and that makes this even more tumultuous for the port of LA and Long Beach. So, Tony, let me start with you right now with what you just talked about in terms of ships coming over. It looks like they're getting some ease in terms of the numbers of ships are coming over, but container dwell times continue to go up. They're still talking about threatening this particular this fine that was perhaps going to go into effect last year, but may now start to go into effect this year, which is $100 a day, compounded day after day. How do you see just operations, perhaps, and what's going to go on at the port over the course of the next few months or so?
Well, I think some of this dwell time has to do with, or this dwell time increases the inventory levels that retailers have just amounted so much inventory. They don't need to move the containers like they did before, right? So before it was they couldn't get the containers moved. Now it's they don't want them moved because then they have to take ownership of it, right? So I think that's some of it. I do think this fine, as we've seen it over the course of the last year, we'll charge you $100 a day, and it keeps getting pushed out to when they're actually going to implement it.
Right.
I don't know if they'll ever actually implement it. I think it's just kind of this broad threat that's there, and maybe one day it'll be implemented, but it sure doesn't seem like there's any haste to move along with this fine.
It's starting to look like that with the numbers that are there as well.
Yeah, they're kind of like the mom and dad that never follow through with the
true, exactly. So, Michael Vincent, let's look at the California AB 5, of course, that went through, and now is the law of California and also the law of the land. We also talked about this idea a few months ago about the drayage trucks in the Port of LA and Long Beach that have, if they have engines 2007, 2008, 2009, they have to be phased out by the end of the year. And that at the time, depending on what the kind of numbers you were looking at, that means a loss of either between 21 and 26% of the trucks in the port at that particular time. As far as the trucking and getting these containers out of there, now what do you look at in terms of the headache of the ports in terms of moving these containers?
Well, I think if AB5 almost makes the engine ban a moot point, right?
Just about, yeah.
Because I'm sure that 26% gets absorbed into that AB5, right? No, it doesn't make things easier. That is for certain, because a lot of that stuff, or the vast majority of that, has got to be in the ports, right? Of these gig type workers that are running through there, and that's one of the things I'll be looking at Sonar is really those city moves and short moves, the 100-mile and less. Because really coming out of LA, measuring that port and the effect of AB5 there is really that, because it's only 36 miles to the inland empire or something like that. So, and that's where a lot of those moves are, and then maybe a couple hundred up north and that type of stuff. But it's. It doesn't help matters. I don't know that the two combined make it excessively more, right? Because it's not one on top of the other.
Right.
I think it may encourage a greater percentage to say, forget it, and not fight this and try and figure out what to do, because not only do they have to get a new truck, they got to get a new truck that's still at inflated prices, and then they got to figure out how to deal with not being allowed to be a gig worker, which everybody forgets. They forgot to ask the gig worker what they thought about this, right?
And it's going to be interesting, especially when you talk about getting a new truck, as we talked with Donnie Gilbert about that, while they're going to wait as long as possible.
Sure.
To see those prices drop, and obviously they're not going to get back to where prices were. But they will still be inflated.
Yeah, everything on top of everything. a really difficult time to negotiate and navigate the ship that is Long Beach and LA.
Yeah. So looking at that, Tony, one of the pieces of good news, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act coming through, at least giving the government some teeth, the FMC some teeth in terms of, we talked about those fines.
Yeah.
Is there a silver lining to this, or are we kind of doom and gloom looking forward?
No, I mean, as I just talked with Kevin, you're seeing demand kind of come down in that Ocean Shipping Reform Act, right? Trying to kind of put a cap on some of these ocean rates and things like that, try to implement them. Well, the good news is they're coming down naturally too, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like the timing of passing this makes it look better than what was actually what was happening, right? So we were at the peak. This thing passes, right?
Right.
They don't actually have to do a whole lot, and naturally, demand's coming down, rates follow, right? So it's one of those things. It probably looks a little better optically than it actually what it's doing. But I think it is a good thing, and we don't see this run up of container spot rates again, like we saw, 10x of what they were.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the silver lining is. It's not necessarily on the way down because things are already headed that way. It's the way, if this thing reverses course and heads back up, once we start this next bull run, whenever that is, kind of keeps them in a more predictable range.
Okay, so let me ask both of you this. Let's say you can apply this from any perspective. Let's say you're Gene Soroka. Let's say you're the workers. Let's say you're the union. Let's say you're the companies operating inside the ports. As you look at these factors and what this all means in terms of the negotiations, do you change your tactics? Do you do anything? I mean, what do you think is going to be the end result of this? Granted, we're in such a fluctual period where everything seems to be moving right now, and we're talking about a deal here with the unions they're talking about a 5-year deal. So this is not a short-term fix to anything. We're talking about the next 5 years.
If I'm Gene Soroka, what do I do?
If you're any part of these negotiations, or you're looking at Gene Soroka and say, what's the outcome of this? What are you looking positively? Are you looking negatively?
Man, I think eventually it's positive.
Okay.
I mean, it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to answer it. But I mean, I think the most obvious one is the route I'll just take. It's going to be very difficult in the short term and near term. I would think it's not going to be rosy. We're not going to get through this without any bumps and screws and scrapes. But eventually, I think it'll work out. It has to eventually work out. It is our engine, right? That we're talking about here, and so it has to. It's like AB5, right? You talk to some. Eventually, AB5 could be better for the driver, but the way it's being implemented and jammed down the throat is the part that's going to be take some medicine to get over.
Do you think that this could be a cautionary tale, or perhaps one that other ports and states can look forward and say, hey, we could possibly model what we do if we had run into this situation?
Well, I mean, California always kind of moves a little faster than everyone else.
True.
But sometimes they go so fast that other people hit the brakes. So I think there is that cautionary tale, but I think it gives at least a blueprint, right, of how to handle it. And I think you've seen it. I mean, with the port, we've talked about it a bunch. The East Coast has grabbed some of that share from the West Coast, right? So they're going to have to go into some of these labor negotiations at some point as well. They're not going to want to give up that share that they just took from California and give it right back. So I think that's what you're going to see a little bit is what did they do that kind of caused them to gain this share, other than having the issues with the congestion and things like that? Like, were there labor talks that basically helped aid in us taking share, and how do we avoid losing it back to them when we have to have these negotiations? Do
any of these influences, like we talked about the container dwell time fines possibly being implemented, we're talking about AB5, we're talking about the drayage truck issues, do any of these issues change either side of the perspective of the negotiations, or are they just still basically going along the same things? Remember, we did talk about one of the factors that they were looking at was, of course, the union not wanting to see automation becoming more prevalent, because that obviously kills union jobs, or at least some union jobs. But do any of these influences change the negotiation whatsoever, or is it still business as usual at the negotiating table?
I think it changes it from the perspective of outside influences onto the negotiations, like the administration pressuring them to stay open, right? I don't buy much of anything I hear or read. But this one, really smells like baloney to me, that both sides came together and say, hey, we love each other, we're going to get along. And don't worry about it, we're going to stay open. I think there's a lot of pressure, and that's the influence.
And neither side has said we're going to go to a lockout or go to a strike.
Right, which is baloney. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that may be true, but where the catalyst that caused that sentiment to come out is not as genuine as you think.
Yeah, and again, like you're talking, the share that California has taken is also, the share that California wants to keep, and obviously a lockout strike situation damages that as well. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start looking at it, you start seeing this falling demand. I think you would want to get this thing done earlier than later, and I think that kind of...
And yet it has pushed its way past the July 1st deadline.
The problem is, do you push this out another month, which hopefully is not the case. But, you start looking at the factors that we saw start in early June. They're going to start mounting here domestically at the ports within the next few weeks. So I think they're going to – I think if I was in this situation, I want it to get done sooner rather than later.
Okay. Does anybody benefit if this goes longer?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think either side benefits from this getting bad or getting bad. I think the tail will be. It'll be difficult. The longer it goes, if we have more difficulties and more congestion at the port, it gives one side a narrative to claim maybe they're slow walking or working to the rule when the other isn't, and then things could break down and get ugly. The first one to throw a stone is going to mess this up bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think either. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing the longer this goes for either side.
No.
I think it's in both best interest to get it done. It's that old prisoner's dilemma. It's the best interest, but who does it first? Like, do you act in your own best interest? And that tells you probably should, but you never know.
Yeah.
It'll be an interesting situation to watch at the very least. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for this edition of Roundtable. We'll take a short break, and we'll come back and wrap up this edition of FreightWaves Now after this.